Do you love us? Can you come get us? Cause we wanna ride around the town with you. Cause we miss you and we love you. To your daddy. Say Z, do you love us? Can we route you around the city? Cause we love you and we miss you and we want you. Hello? Cause I thought a broke bitch some Z.
On June 7, 2022, in Jackson, Mississippi, 26-year-old Terrencia Jackson was shot and killed in her own bed by her ex-boyfriend, Zverian Brent. This act of violence didn't just end a young mother's life. It extinguished a light in her community, left a child without her mother, and exposed the dangerous consequences when jealousy overtakes reason. But who was Terrencia Jackson beyond the headlines of her tragic death? To understand the full impact of this loss, we must first know the woman whose life was cut short that morning. Born on May 12, 1996, in Jackson, Mississippi, Terrencia grew up surrounded by family. As the second of 8 children, she experienced life within a close-knit family structure that valued togetherness and community support. Her early years were marked by active participation in her local church, where the foundations of her character, responsibility, compassion, and dedication to others took shape. Jackson's educational journey led her through Provine High School in her hometown. While not defined by academic accolades, her schooling provided her with practical knowledge and social connections that would serve her throughout her short life. Former classmates describe a young woman who moved through the halls with quiet confidence, someone who didn't seek the spotlight, but whose presence was nonetheless felt. Terrencia had this way about her, says a childhood friend who wished to remain anonymous. She didn't need to be the center of attention, but when she spoke, people listened. There was an authenticity to her that you don't often find. After completing high school, Terrencia found her professional place at UPS. Her position there wasn't just employment. It was evidence of her reliability and commitment. Co-workers note that she rarely missed a shift and approached her responsibilities with dedication. This job provided the financial stability she needed as a young mother, enabling her to create a life for herself and her daughter Zarencia. The mother-daughter bond between Terrencia and Zarencia stood at the center of Jackson's world. Friends and family consistently mention how Terrencia's eyes would light up when speaking about her daughter. She approached motherhood with intention, working to create opportunities for Zarencia that she herself may not have had. Whether reading together before bed, teaching her the family recipes that had been passed down for generations, or simply spending quiet moments in each other's company, Terrencia embodied devoted motherhood. Everything Terrencia did was for that little girl, her mother would later tell investigators. Every extra shift, every sacrifice, it was all to give Zarencia a good life. Beyond her roles as employee and mother, Terrencia Jackson was known for her authentic joy in life's simple pleasures. She loved travel, not necessarily to exotic locations, but to places where she could create memories with loved ones. Shopping trips became adventures, and family gatherings transformed into celebrations under her influence. Her laughter, described by many as infectious, could change the atmosphere of a room in an instant. Despite financial constraints that many young single mothers face, Terrencia approached life with resourcefulness rather than resentment. She found ways to create special moments without extravagance, teaching those around her that meaningful experiences don't require wealth. But Terrencia's story also included complications. Her previous relationship with Zverian Brent had ended, and she had moved forward with a new partner. What she couldn't have known was how dangerously Brent's inability to accept this new reality would manifest. The shadows of this past relationship would ultimately lead to the tragedy that ended her life. The loss of Terrencia Jackson at 26 years old represents more than just a statistic in domestic violence reports. It represents the absence of a mother at future birthday parties, graduations, and life milestones. It means one fewer dedicated employee, supportive sister, loving daughter, and loyal friend in a community that valued her presence. As we explore the events that led to June 7, 2022, remember that at the heart of this story is a woman whose life had value far beyond the circumstances of her death. Before we continue with Terrencia's story, I want to ask you to take a moment to engage with this video. The reality is that domestic violence affects millions of lives yearly, often hidden behind closed doors until tragedy strikes. Your engagement helps spread awareness about these issues to those who might need it most. Please hit the like button if you believe these stories deserve to be told, and subscribe to our channel for more documentaries that shed light on important social issues. If you know someone affected by domestic violence, sharing this video could connect them with life-saving information. Now let's examine the relationship that ultimately led to Terrencia's untimely death. The connection between Terrencia Jackson and Zverian Brent represents a critical chapter in understanding the events that led to the tragedy of June 7, 2022. Court records and family accounts provide limited insight into how they first met, but what emerges clearly is that their relationship would eventually become defined by tension and possessiveness that persisted long after their romantic involvement had ended. Friends of Terrencia noted that the early days of their relationship appeared normal from the outside. The couple shared common interests and moved within similar social circles in Jackson. However, as time progressed, the relationship dynamics began to shift. Those close to Terrencia observed subtle changes in her demeanor when Brent was present: a quieter voice, more cautious responses, and less of the natural vibrancy that typically characterized her interactions. She became different around him, one family member later testified. Not entirely herself, more guarded. The exact timeline and circumstances of their breakup remain somewhat unclear, with conflicting accounts from various sources. What is evident is that their separation didn't represent a clean break for Brent, who struggled significantly with acceptance. While Terrencia viewed their relationship as definitively over, Brent appeared to regard it as merely paused or temporarily derailed. Brent's personal history before meeting Terrencia included several concerning elements that, in retrospect, suggested potential volatility. Law enforcement records show previous charges related to drug possession, indicating a pattern of risk-taking behavior. More significantly, his record included issues related to firearms, a fact that would later prove tragically relevant. These legal troubles, while not directly connected to domestic issues, painted a picture of an individual whose judgment was questionable and whose respect for boundaries, both legal and personal, was compromised. While no documented cases of physical violence between Brent and Terrencia exist in police records, his history suggested an underlying capacity for aggression that may have manifested in less visible ways during their relationship. After the relationship ended, Terrencia made the decision to move forward with her life. She focused on her daughter Zarian, her job at UPS, and eventually opened herself to the possibility of a new romantic connection. This new relationship represented a fresh start for Terrencia, an opportunity to experience companionship without the tension that had come to define her time with Brent. For Terrencia, this new relationship was a natural progression. For Brent, it became an intolerable reality. His inability to process Terrencia's decision to move on manifested as increasing resentment and fixation. What began as occasional unwanted contact evolved into something more persistent and concerning. The presence of a new man in Terrencia's life functioned as a catalyst, intensifying Brent's possessiveness to dangerous levels. Despite having no rightful claim to Terrencia's affections or loyalty, Brent appeared to view her new relationship as a personal betrayal rather than the natural consequence of their breakup. As Terrencia established greater independence and happiness apart from Brent, his hostility grew proportionally. Phone records would later show an increasing frequency of calls from Brent to Terrencia in the weeks leading up to June 7, calls that often went unanswered or were quickly terminated. Brent's behavior exhibited the classic pattern of someone unable to relinquish perceived ownership over another person. His actions reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of relationships, that they exist through mutual consent rather than unilateral desire. This distorted perspective would ultimately drive him to violence when confronted with the finality of Terrencia's decision. The most alarming aspect of this dynamic was how Brent's private resentment remained largely invisible to those who might have intervened. Without documented threats or previous violence, the danger he presented wasn't apparent enough to trigger protective measures. Even Terrencia herself may not have fully recognized the extent of the threat, having no way to gauge how deeply his jealousy had consumed rational thought. This relationship history establishes the psychological foundation for what would later unfold on that June morning. The combination of Brent's personal instability, his inability to accept rejection, and his growing fixation on Terrencia's new relationship created a volatile situation that would ultimately reach its breaking point when he discovered Terrencia in bed with her new partner. The events that unfolded on June 7, 2022, were not the result of a momentary lapse in judgment or a sudden burst of emotion. Evidence collected by investigators points strongly to the premeditated nature of Zverian Brent's actions that morning. In the hours before he arrived at Terrencia's home on Fleetwood Drive in Jackson, Mississippi, Brent had made a deliberate decision that would forever alter multiple lives and devastate a community. Law enforcement analysis of the crime scene indicated that Brent had likely planned his approach to the residence with intention. His arrival in the early morning hours, when most people would be vulnerable and unprepared, suggests tactical consideration rather than impulsive action. The choice of timing demonstrated a calculated effort to maximize vulnerability and minimize the chance of intervention. According to police reports, Brent did not announce his presence or attempt any form of communication before entering. Instead, he forcibly accessed the residence where Terrencia and her new boyfriend were sleeping. The method of entry itself indicated determination and purpose, with investigators noting signs of deliberate force used to gain access to the home. What makes the premeditation particularly evident was Brent's possession of a firearm. This wasn't a confrontation that escalated to violence. It began with the means for violence already in hand. Brent arrived prepared to use deadly force, having equipped himself with a weapon before even setting foot on the property. As Brent moved through the residence toward Terrencia's bedroom, his intent became unmistakable. The forensic evidence would later show a direct path from the point of entry to the location where Terrencia lay sleeping, suggesting he knew exactly where to find her and moved with singular purpose. The moment Brent entered the bedroom represented the culmination of his increasing hostility and possessiveness. There, he discovered Terrencia in bed with her new boyfriend, a visual confirmation of the relationship that had fueled his jealousy. What followed was not a confrontation or argument, but immediate violence. Without warning or opportunity for Terrencia to protect herself, Brent opened fire. The ballistic evidence collected at the scene told investigators a horrifying story. Multiple shots fired at close range, targeting Terrencia with lethal precision. The attack was not random or chaotic, but focused primarily on Terrencia, though her boyfriend also sustained injuries during the assault. The pattern of gunfire indicates intent, one detective noted in the official report. This wasn't random. The majority of shots were directed specifically at the victim. Terrencia's boyfriend, despite being wounded in the attack, attempted to defend her. His efforts, though valiant, came too late to prevent the fatal shots that would claim Terrencia's life. His survival would later prove crucial to the investigation, providing eyewitness testimony about the manner and method of the attack. The violence ended as quickly as it had begun. In the aftermath, Brent fled the scene immediately, making no attempt to render aid or acknowledge the consequences of his actions. He left behind a scene of devastating loss, Terrencia fatally wounded, her boyfriend injured, and a home transformed from sanctuary to crime scene. Emergency services responded to calls from neighbors who reported hearing gunshots at the Fleetwood Drive address. When first responders arrived, they found a chaotic scene. Paramedics immediately attended to the victims, but despite their rapid response and efforts to provide medical intervention, Terrencia's injuries proved too severe. Medical personnel pronounced her dead at the scene, while her boyfriend was transported to a local hospital with non-fatal injuries. Police secured the area and began the methodical process of collecting evidence. Forensic teams documented bullet trajectories, collected shell casings, and photographed the scene. Detectives interviewed neighbors and began constructing a timeline of events. The boyfriend, though hospitalized, provided critical details that quickly identified Zverian Brent as the prime suspect. As news of the shooting spread throughout Jackson, the community's response was immediate and profound. Friends and family gathered near Terrencia's home, creating an impromptu memorial with flowers, photographs, and personal messages. The loss of a young mother known for her positive spirit and dedication to her family resonated deeply within the neighborhood. Local organizations that work with domestic violence victims noted an increase in calls in the days following Terrencia's death, evidence that her story prompted others to seek help before facing similar circumstances. Community leaders called for increased awareness about relationship violence and the potential dangers when former partners refuse to accept separation. For Terrencia's daughter Zarian, the mourning represented an incomprehensible loss, the sudden absence of a mother who would never return. Family members sheltered the child from the immediate trauma of the scene, but faced the devastating task of explaining that her mother was gone forever. In the hours following the shooting, law enforcement initiated a citywide search for Brent, who had disappeared after fleeing the Fleetwood Drive residence. His escape from the scene marked the beginning of a manhunt that would continue for the next 2 days, as investigators gathered additional evidence and tracked his movements. The fatal morning of June 7 stands as a stark example of how quickly domestic situations can turn deadly when jealousy, possession, and access to weapons converge. What began as an ordinary night for Terrencia ended in tragedy, leaving a community to grapple with questions about prevention, protection, and justice. As we pause to reflect on these devastating events, I want to encourage you to engage with this important discussion. Terrencia's story highlights how quickly domestic situations can escalate to violence. If this documentary has impacted you, please take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to our channel for more content that brings attention to these critical issues. Your comments help create a community of awareness and support for those who may be facing similar dangers. By sharing this video, you could potentially help someone recognize warning signs in their own relationships. Let's continue examining how the justice system responded to this tragedy and what we can learn from Terrencia's story. In the wake of the violence at Terrencia Jackson's residence, law enforcement moved swiftly to secure the scene and commence their investigation. Officers cordoned off the property on Fleetwood Drive, establishing a perimeter that would protect crucial evidence, while forensic teams began their meticulous work. The process of documenting and collecting evidence began immediately, with specialists photographing the scene exactly as it was found before any items were moved or removed. Investigators paid particular attention to ballistic evidence, which would prove critical to reconstructing the sequence of events. Shell casings were marked, logged, and collected for analysis. The trajectory of bullets was mapped to determine the shooter's position relative to the victims. This technical analysis supported the testimony provided by Terrencia's boyfriend, who had survived the attack and could provide a first-hand account of what transpired. The evidence told a clear story, explained one detective who worked the case. The positioning of the victims, the bullet paths, and the shell casings all aligned with the survivor's statement about how the attack occurred. Forensic teams collected DNA samples, fingerprints, and other trace evidence that might help identify the perpetrator or confirm the survivor's account. Though Brent was quickly identified as the primary suspect based on witness testimony, building a solid forensic case remained essential for eventual prosecution. The medical examiner's report provided additional crucial information, detailing the precise nature of Terrencia's injuries and confirming the cause of death as multiple gunshot wounds. The report indicated the shooting occurred at close range, further supporting the conclusion that this was a targeted attack rather than a random act of violence. As the evidence collection at the crime scene progressed, a parallel operation began, the search for Zverian Brent, who had fled immediately after the shooting. Local police coordinated with county and state agencies to locate Brent, who had disappeared from his known addresses. Investigators interviewed associates and monitored locations where he might seek shelter. The search expanded when evidence suggested Brent had left the immediate area, possibly with assistance. This development led authorities to request support from federal resources. The U.S. Marshals Service, with its specialized expertise in fugitive apprehension, joined the effort to locate and capture Brent. For 2 days, Brent managed to avoid apprehension, moving between locations and staying ahead of law enforcement. However, the coordinated effort between local police and federal marshals eventually yielded results. On June 9, 2022, just 2 days after the murder, U.S. Marshals located and apprehended Brent. The circumstances of his capture revealed that Brent had not been acting alone in his efforts to evade justice. Investigators discovered that an individual named Vita Valentine had provided assistance to Brent following the shooting. This assistance included transportation, shelter, and other support that enabled Brent to temporarily avoid capture despite the intensive search. Valentine's involvement led to additional charges being filed. While Brent would face the most serious accusation of capital murder, Valentine was charged as an accessory after the fact. This charge reflected the legal system's position that helping a fugitive evade capture constitutes a separate criminal offense, particularly in cases involving violent crimes. Following his capture, Brent made his initial court appearance. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence against him, the court denied bond, a decision that meant Brent would remain in custody throughout the legal proceedings. This ruling acknowledged both the serious nature of the crime and the potential flight risk, given his previous attempt to evade authorities. The prosecution presented the case against Brent, outlining the evidence collected at the scene and the testimony of the surviving victim. The charges of capital murder reflected both the premeditated nature of the attack and the circumstances surrounding it. In Mississippi, murder committed during the commission of certain felonies, including burglary, or murder committed with particular cruelty can elevate the charge to capital murder, potentially carrying the most severe penalties available under state law. As the case moved through the legal system, prosecutors worked to construct a timeline that demonstrated Brent's actions before, during, and after the shooting. This chronology was essential to establishing both motive and intent, key elements in proving capital murder. The evidence collected at the scene, combined with witness statements and the history between Brent and Terrencia, formed the foundation of the state's case. The legal proceedings continued with preliminary hearings, during which the prosecution presented sufficient evidence to move forward with the case. While the wheels of justice turned slowly, Terrencia's family attended each court session, seeking closure and accountability for their loss. As of the most recent court proceedings, Brent remains in custody, with the case undergoing extensive legal review. The prosecution continues to build their case, while the defense prepares their strategy. The final outcome, including verdict and potential sentencing, remains pending, with Terrencia's family waiting for the justice system to conclude its work. The death of Terrencia Jackson exposes significant gaps in the systems designed to protect individuals from relationship violence. Despite the presence of structures intended to identify and intervene in potentially dangerous situations, multiple points of failure allowed Brent's hostility to escalate unchecked until it culminated in violence. One of the most concerning aspects of this case involves the insufficient reporting mechanisms for early-stage domestic conflicts. Without documented instances of physical abuse between Terrencia and Brent, the situation remained largely invisible to protective agencies. This highlights a fundamental weakness in current protocols. They often require evidence of past violence before intervention becomes possible, creating a dangerous waiting period during which situations can deteriorate beyond recovery. The problem is that our systems are designed to respond to violence after it occurs, not prevent it before it happens, explains one domestic violence prevention advocate familiar with cases like Terrencia's. What we need are intervention points that activate when concerning behaviors first appear, not after they've escalated to physical harm. Perhaps most troubling is the question of how Brent gained access to a firearm despite his previous involvement with the legal system. His prior charges related to drugs and firearms should have triggered restrictions on weapon purchases, yet these safeguards proved insufficient. The ability of individuals with documented high-risk behaviors to obtain deadly weapons represents a critical failure point that directly contributed to Terrencia's death. This case demonstrates the need for more comprehensive background check systems and better integration between criminal records and gun purchase databases. The gaps between different systems, criminal justice, mental health, and firearm regulation, created spaces through which Brent could slip despite numerous red flags in his history. Jackson's community, like many across America, lacked adequate training to recognize concerning patterns in relationships before they turned deadly. Friends, family members, co-workers, and neighbors may notice subtle shifts in behavior without recognizing their significance or knowing how to respond appropriately. Communities equipped with knowledge about concerning behaviors, such as excessive jealousy, attempts to isolate partners from support networks, and an inability to accept relationship boundaries, are better positioned to offer support before situations become dangerous. Educational programs that teach these recognition skills could create networks of informed individuals capable of identifying risk factors before they escalate to violence. For those in potentially dangerous relationships, resources exist but often remain underutilized due to lack of awareness or accessibility issues. Domestic violence hotlines, shelters, and advocacy organizations offer crucial support, including safety planning, temporary housing, and legal assistance with protective orders. Legal aid organizations can help navigate the complex process of securing court-ordered protection, while counseling services provide emotional support during difficult transitions. However, these resources are only effective when those who need them know they exist and can access them safely. In many communities, including Jackson, Mississippi, service gaps leave vulnerable individuals without clear pathways to protection. Despite the tragic circumstances of her death, Terrencia Jackson's legacy continues through her impact on those who knew her and through the conversations her story has sparked about domestic violence prevention. Her family, particularly her daughter Zarencia, carries forward the memory of her vibrant spirit and loving nature. Community members who knew Terrencia describe her as someone whose life exemplified resilience and dedication to family, qualities that continue to inspire those she left behind. Local organizations have used her story to initiate conversations about relationship safety and the importance of community vigilance in protecting vulnerable individuals. The most meaningful tribute to Terrencia's memory may be the strengthening of protection systems to prevent similar tragedies. Improvements in domestic violence response protocols, better enforced restrictions on firearm access for high-risk individuals, and enhanced community education about relationship violence would create lasting change that honors her life by protecting others. As we conclude Terrencia's story, I invite you to take meaningful action. If you or someone you know is experiencing relationship violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Your engagement with this video helps bring attention to these critical issues. Please like, share, and subscribe to amplify these important conversations. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how communities can better protect vulnerable individuals. Terrencia Jackson's story reminds us that awareness and intervention can save lives. By supporting each other and demanding better systems, we honor her memory and work toward a future where such tragedies become increasingly rare. Thank you for bearing witness to Terrencia's story.